Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching the Wire Wrap. I'm Sravasti Dasgupta. On Saturday, 4 days after a tense military standoff between India and Pakistan, a ceasefire was announced, not by either India or Pakistan, but by US President Donald Trump. Now, since then, Trump has continued to claim that he has been the one who has mediated the ceasefire between India and Pakistan, and he has claimed credit for it. He has even gone on to say that it was trade that was leveraged between these two countries, and therefore the ceasefire agreement was reached. India has taken a very measured position on this, first not coming on record to say anything about Trump's claims, and then we saw the Ministry of External Affairs giving a statement 2 days ago. So to discuss all this and more, what does it mean for India and Pakistan going forward, and why is the US president continuing to make such claims, at least four such statements in recent days since the ceasefire was reached, and what does this mean going forward for India, where mediation has not really been on the books and India has historically been deciding its issues bilaterally? So what has that changed? Is India Pakistan back to being rehyphenated? To discuss all this, I'm being joined by Devirupa Mitra. She's a foreign affairs editor at The Wire, and I'm being also joined by Kallol Bhattacharjee. He's a foreign affairs correspondent at The Hindu. Thank you so much for joining us. First off, let's get started with all these claims that are coming from Donald Trump, which is actually what I think everybody is talking about, but the Indian government is not talking so much about as much as Trump is talking. So first we saw Trump starting with the statement that came on the ceasefire on Saturday evening. It was not India or Pakistan. We saw a statement on Twitter saying that he has brokered a ceasefire deal between the two countries after a very long night, and since then he has continued to make several such claims that he threatened to suspend trade. He brought back the two countries from the brink of a nuclear war, and he's saying many things in the last few days. Now, the MEA has come on record 2 days ago and set the record straight on a couple of things. So, Devirupa, why don't you start off on what the MEA has said on Trump's claims and what it has not said?
So, Trump has made a lot of statements in the last since May 10th, and he started with obviously first saying that the ceasefire has been full and complete ceasefire has been declared between India and Pakistan, and then he went on to say that basically trade is an issue that even though it was not discussed between both the sides, but I will do a lot of trade with both the countries. Then he also basically put both India and Pakistan on the same platform, that according to Indian analysts, by again and again referring to that both are great countries and both the leadership are very sagacious and they have chosen peace this time. And again, the trade issue was, he also mentioned again that basically he is willing to find a solution, sit down and work and support to the two countries to find a solution on Kashmir, which he again repeated is a 1,000-year problem. Again, the trade issue, when he gave a very detailed in the speech at I think it was at the White House, first at the White House event on the health it was a health event where he talked about a detail about how basically he used trade as a leverage. And he told them, both sides, that you have to do, you have to come to and finish the fighting, otherwise I won't do trade with you. So there has been a lot of interesting statements that have been coming out. So we didn't have so far MEA or the Indian government give any on-record rebuttal to these statements. We had, for example, on Saturday, even actually on Sunday itself, we had a rebuttal of sorts.
It was an off-the-record.
Off-the-record sources. We had off the record quite a substantial rebuttal.
Tuesday, of course, it came as an on-record official spokesperson.
Yes, but again, there was no direct. If you look at the statement of the MEA, where they said key trade matter was again not discussed in any of the phone calls between the US interlocutors and the Indian side, or basically that the mediation is not at all on the table. There was no direct criticism of the US government or a mention of the Trump statements explicitly, which is kind of interesting in the sense that they are trying to still balance and not antagonize White House, because it's very clear that right now the the ceasefire issue is kind of a pet foreign policy triumph of Trump, or at least that's how he seeing it. He has had a lot of bad press because of the tariff issue domestically, and he had to have compromise a lot. For example, he recently just had to compromise with China on the tariff, where he had to bring down all the tariffs from 150% to 30%. So he needed foreign policy wins right now, and he sees this as a major win, where he can be seen as a statesman, bringing two warring children in a nursery together, and and declaring you have time out kind of thing.
So I want to ask you, Kallol, on the sequence of events really. Now, since then, of course, we saw, of course, Trump's statement. Then we saw Marco Rubio's statement talking about talks and mediation. Rubio's statement was a little more detailed on Saturday, when he said that talks will take place at a neutral site. Later, of course, the Indian government, through MEA spokesperson, has said no such thing will take place. But just talking about how this ceasefire was really reached, India has maintained, including Prime Minister Modi, has maintained that it was the Pakistan's DGMO that called up India. And just quoting what Modi said in his address on Monday and Tuesday, in his national address on Monday and at the address at the Adampur Air Base on Tuesday, he said that Pakistan was desperate after the losses that India had inflicted on Pakistan, and its DGMO called up the Indian counterpart, and then the ceasefire was agreed. This is completely contrary to what the US is saying. How do you see this contradiction, and why is this contradiction even there? I mean, how must one see this?
Well, to begin with, you have to go back to the starting point, which is the Operation Sindoor, as it is known as. It's happening at, say, 1:30 or 2 a.m. in the morning of 7th of May. And then the Indian side comes out with this very crisp statement where it says that it is a counter-terror operation, right? So a counter-terror operation which has taken place inside Pakistani territory, and it also means that the Pakistan military itself is not a target. Now, that basically sets the goalpost very clear for India, that as long as we have our vital interests being attacked by Pakistan-based terrorists, we are going to target the Pakistan-based terrorists and their camps. But within 24 hours, what happens is that the Pakistan military mobilizes itself, accuses India of violating Pakistan's sovereignty, and we have a military-to-military confrontation. So that's escalation number one. Within the next 24 hours, that is after 48 hours, what we are witnessing is that India is hitting at vital military installations, not just in Punjab but in Sindh. Now that is pretty unprecedented in terms of escalation. So you have not only a military-to-military confrontation, and within the 72 hours, we also feel that if this military-to-military confrontation goes ahead, then it may also trigger some sort of a response from the Chinese. Now, these are all unwritten subtexts, right? In the form of, say, the Chinese ambassador going to the foreign ministry in Islamabad and meeting and holding discussions. The Turkish ambassador was already, going and meeting his counterparts there. So you have these indications, coming to our side also, that showed that perhaps things had to be wrapped up very fast. So whatever message India had to deliver in the form of attacking those air bases, India had delivered. And after all, I don't think at that point that that sort of political clearance probably would not have come to take it beyond a certain level of escalation in terms of military-to-military confrontation, because there is also a Russia factor related to China, because Russia and China are very good friends. Though President Putin, in a statement to our side just 4 days before the conflict, I think 3 days before the conflict, he had said that India has all the right to act against terror forces. But that also made it very obvious that Russia perhaps is holding back as far as military-to-military confrontation, because nobody wanted a very big confrontation to break out at a time when Donald Trump was coming to Saudi Arabia with his huge trade targets. So I think everybody wanted and everyone understood, pragmatically and realistically speaking, that at this window, at this juncture, this conflict could attain this much. And now that an escape route was being provided by a friendly country, and obviously by getting triggered by Pakistan, it was best to take a step back and go for this so-called ceasefire, which is known as the arrangement. It is not even a ceasefire. let's face the fact first. So I think that is the moment, that is how perhaps that agreement to settle down for the moment, to end the military exchanges and the firings took place. This is my assessment, because that's what I gathered.
So, of course, Donald Trump's first statement, and since then, he has continued to use this word ceasefire. India has been using agreement or understanding interchangeably, I believe. Understanding, and not very particularly not using the word ceasefire. So, how is that happening, Devirupa? That the fact that India is not using this word at all, but the world seems to be using this word.
Yeah, I think everybody, if you see the congratulatory messages from the rest of the world, from other countries like France or Sri Lanka or any other country, they're all using the term ceasefire, but we aren't. But for us, it's basically, I think, more of a technical issue and a legal issue also. If you're talking about a ceasefire agreement, it has a certain legal standing.
Also, because I think in 2021 we had a ceasefire agreement with Pakistan, and after that we have accused Pakistan of violating that ceasefire agreement, and Pakistan has also similarly accused India of violating that agreement. So basically, there is no sanctity to the idea of ceasefire, even in the short-term memory. So therefore, perhaps the idea was that let us give it a try and call it some sort of a process or an arrangement, just a break or a pause.
And also, it's basically because they also want to insist that it's a discussion that was done by the DGMO level. Yes. At a lower level. It's not a basically it was done at the political leadership level. Perhaps if it was done at a higher political leadership level, it would have got a different kind of nomenclature. So they want to ensure that they basically that it is the narrative that it is that Pakistan, which basically called up the Indian side, and they asked for a cessation of hostilities, as it is called. That is the main thrust of the Indian side's narrative, and that has to be reinforced. And that's the reason we use the term in the understanding.
The other point is that keeping it limited to the level of, say, additional secretaries and joint secretaries and the DGMO is also politically convenient, because when you have someone like Trump, who likes to play the game himself and doesn't prefer to leave it to his junior officials. On the Indian side, I have noticed that there is a desire to play it at the level of medium officials or even junior level officials, because there is no desire to get into a face-off with Donald Trump, because he is the Superman, in so to say, the leader of the superpower, because otherwise it becomes a political leader versus political leader, and that India wants to avoid at all costs.
Yeah, and we all remember that very public conversation between Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky, which did not very volatile, and I don't think India would like a situation like that, which was televised and in front of everyone. But I want to come back to the question of these talks that are supposed to be taking place at the DGMO level, which is so explain to our viewers, both of you, for this, that because the opposition leaders in India are talking very vociferously since Saturday that India had ruled out third-party mediation and issues between are to be settled bilaterally. Now with Donald Trump claiming credit that he has mediated this agreement/ceasefire, as one would see it, is that a departure from India's stated policy at this point, or is it not, because it's at the DGMO level and it's not at the level of political leadership?
Technically, I won't say it's a deviation, because when we talk about third-party mediation, it's about the Kashmir issue per se, about the whole the issue about the Kashmir dispute, about the status and all that. We have had a third-party intervention, or whatever you call it, for cessation of hostilities for a long time, starting with Tashkent and all that. So we have, for stopping hostilities, because so many wars, this is not a new thing that we have had third countries coming in and making both the parties stop their fighting. So in that sense, I don't think this is not a deviation from the norm at all.
I think we have to remember here that both these terms, like third-party intervention and bilateral framework, both these terms have their own lives. The idea that India-Pakistan relation has to deal with the Kashmir issue within a bilateral framework is more or less pinned down to 1972, the Simla Agreement. In the Simla Agreement, it became very obvious that India was the victorious side in the 1971 war. India was the stronger party, and therefore the rules were laid down by India. And Pakistan more or less agreed, because Pakistan didn't, in Donald Trump's language, didn't have the cards, because India held all those soldiers, 94,000 soldiers. But if you go back in time, you find in 1965 there were both the Americans, the Canadians, the United Kingdom, and of course Soviet Union. All four of them were trying to get into the India-Pakistan conflict, because the 65 war really went on for nearly 5 months. It began in September, October, and then it went on till January next year. So there you had not only the third party, there were literally fifth party, fourth party, and sixth party as well. Literally seventh party also getting involved. And going back in time, even 1960, the Indus Waters Treaty, and Devirupa perhaps can talk about it also, that it was actually mediated by the Americans, the World Bank, okay, and then there were Nehru's friends also, and the Pakistani side was also comfortable with the American involvement at that time. And prior to that, Pakistan was party of these strategic groupings called SEATO and CENTO. So that made United States even more, involved in ensuring Pakistan's physical safety. So throughout the 1950s and the 1960s, it was in American interest that the United States always used to get triggered whenever there was an India-Pakistan conflict. So there is this whole lot of biography of these terms and terminologies. So these are not something that is happening for the first time. But one thing that we have to remember that happened, or even happening right now, is that in this conflict during Operation Sindoor, the Indian side and the Pakistani side, they did not evacuate their diplomats from each other's territory. The Indian embassy, Indian High Commission in Islamabad, and the Pakistani High Commission in New Delhi continues to function. Of course, they are under pressure, but the two sides have not shut down their embassies. So when India says that it has to be conducted at the bilateral level, India is actually proving with its own actions that its diplomats are stationed in Islamabad. And if Pakistan has to reach out to the Indian side, they can very well reach out through the Indian diplomats. So exactly. So I think.
In fact, if you remember Marco Rubio's tweet, one of those lines in I think 7th and 8th, one of those that basically India and Pakistan should maintain, and we will support communication channels between both the sides. So we had asked the MEA side, and what does it mean that basically are there any diplomatic channels which are open? Because earlier, if you remember, on May 7th, there were talks about the Pakistani side had put out a story, plant, whatever you call it, that the two NSAs had talked to each other. It was later denied. Later.
Both sides denied.
Denied it. But it was like the MEA side had told us basically that obviously we had diplomatic channels are open because we have embassies on both the sides, and the Indian CDA was summoned to the Pakistan Foreign Ministry on that day after India started Operation Sindoor. So that's how basically I think everybody uses these terminologies on their own way, and they can argue it basically that it doesn't go beyond their red lines.
So both the DGMOs and the high commissions, they continue to function. So therefore, when India says it has to be resolved, it has to be dealt through the bilateral framework, it's quite obvious that it can be conducted bilaterally, provided there is political clearance. Perhaps that requires a little bit of goodwill and a bit of healing time.
So I also want to ask you about all the clarifications in recent days. Has until Tuesday's statement by Randhir Jaiswal, who is the MEA spokesperson, a lot of statements were coming by way of sources in a very important time when this standoff was taking place between India and Pakistan. Though there were daily briefings taking place by the Foreign Secretary, but a lot of rebuttals were coming by way of sources. So how do you see this whole, there was a running joke that sources should have a separate press conference since so much information is coming. So why were these statements coming as source-based, and why did it take so long I won't say so long, but a little bit of time for the government to come on record to take ownership of some of those statements that were coming on sources? What is the story behind the sources information that has continued for the last 1 week?
I think on the MEA beat, we are basically, sources is our main sources of information basically. Because that's a part of our job now, but On the MEA beat, sources are actually sources, and the official sources.
We also have highly placed sources and sources who are part of the decision making process. So it's up to the reader to figure out who exactly, when we say it's a highly placed source, you can imagine it is really a highly placed source, and that source doesn't come for the briefing every day. So when we say sources, it means it's
regular source,
it's a regular source. It's a source who does the press conferences and etc. A highly placed source, or if we say that a source who has been part of the decision making process in Operation Sindoor, we leave it to the reader to figure out, because once we have managed to convince our editors to carry the stories, and we have put our own bylines to it, so it's understood that it has come through the proper channels. So yes, I mean, I would say that it's a really nice question that you ask. What happens is that every foreign policy establishment has its own traditions. Now, when you look at the way, say, the Ukraine war is being reported within the Russian media space, we all know that Russian media is not really as cantankerous as the Indian media, as I would say, as lively as the Indian media at some point, controversial, because but the Russian media has also dealt with their own war in a very, very unique way. There are lots of question marks about how Russia is reporting the Ukraine crisis. Similarly, the Ukraine media has also conducted itself in a very curious way. It depends which perspective you take. So I think crisis moments prompt officials to come up with these strategies, also because they have to survive as well. There are lots of political careers, there are diplomatic and bureaucratic careers at stake, and no one really joins the service to face this sort of life-changing moments in their career. Everyone wants normalcy and so-called steady lives, but these are the moments that are beyond their pay grades, right? I mean, I'm not going into the name of a person, but imagine when you have to come and announce that there is a ceasefire that is to be implemented, and immediately the ceasefire starts falling apart. So you have both the success as well as the failure getting pinned onto the name of that person. So this is something that I don't think anybody who joined the foreign service would like to come to such a turning point in his or her career. Everybody would love to retire gracefully after doing wonderful diplomatic service for the nation. But I think these are the terms and terminologies that the bureaucracy invents to somehow weather the storm that they have to.
But I also believe a lot of the sources is basically used when you have to use sharper language, and it's also about basically a time crunch also. Sometimes you want to give a very quick rebuttal. For example, we saw that especially if I remember right now, Marco Rubio had talked about the third party things. We got a very quick rebuttal from sources saying that nothing like that was happening.
Even before the MEA on the record
statement. On the record statement. Yeah. And then they, even in that, through sources, they give us the list of who called whom on what date. And to say again that none of those phone calls trade was discussed, and that again happened before the on record statements. So many of the things details that they want to give, or the language, if they want to make it stronger, or this thing, they don't want to give it through the MEA spokesperson, who is supposed to be a much more measured and polite way, or diplomatic way of registering a protest. And they use these, and also it gives a kind of a plausible deniability, even though the other side, other foreign offices, everybody knows how the game is played.
But to their credit, one must say that all the source-based statements that we have carried in the last, say, a week or so, they have not been, there has not been denied or not been walked back.
They can't deny it.
Yeah,
technically.
No, so I think I'm just trying to say that all these statements have been crafted very thoughtfully.
So when you're saying that stronger language is used by source-based information in comparison to on-record languages, is the stronger language more for a domestic audience than for a foreign?
Sometimes it depends again who is the audience for that denial or what rebuttal. For example, the rebuttal for the Marco Rubio was both, obviously we had the domestic audience, it will create a lot of political fireball here if after Rubio says that both sides have agreed to talks in a neutral venue. That is kind of like that is a chattering thing to hear from that India would agree to that. So obviously you needed a very quick, I think that sources rebuttal came within very quickly, within 1 hour, if I'm not mistaken. So you had to have that kind of, you had to be very quick in that. And obviously, like you said, it's obviously for the domestic audience. But again, you don't really need a foreign, obviously everybody nowadays the line between a foreign audience and a kind of the domestic audience also gets very blurred, because everybody reads each other's news articles, everything is online. But obviously whatever you want to convey to the foreign side will not be conveyed through media. If you want to say something to the protest to the US government on what Marco Rubio tweeted, it won't be done through this media thing that, sources rebuttal. It would have been done through some other means, a demarche or something else. So this is basically done for I would believe, at least depends from time to time, again from case to case, but I was thinking this one was for a domestic audience.
Yeah, but India-Pakistan conflict is such that where you basically are talking to a part of your own kind of civilization which has turned away from you. That's Pakistan, which follows you 24/7, 365 days. Pakistanis are one of the most avid readers and viewers of Indian media. They're the consumers of Indian media. So you are also addressing them. We have to also remember that India-Pakistan conflict is very unique, where the media messaging is also getting consumed by your Pakistani consumers, even though you are trying to block them from accessing your channels and outlets. So I think it's very complicated, where everyone is involved, both your enemy as well as your friends.
Which also brings me to what you were saying, that if India had to kind of lodge a protest against what Trump has been saying, and it has not done so in the last few days, and and Trump has continued to make these claims, and India has, we saw obviously Ranveer Jaiswal giving his statement, but if what Trump is saying is not true completely, why is India not lodging? Why is India not taking this up diplomatically, or not that we know of? Maybe you both know more about it, but why isn't India proceeding on that? And then Trump is going on talking. He's been, I think, 5 statements in the last 4 days.
I don't think that right now there is much scope for this. The Indian government doesn't think that basically the Trump would be deterred necessarily, and perhaps even he could be incited perhaps if there was too much of a protest, because he's feeling very happy with this whole ceasefire thing, and if it's taken away from him, so to say, I don't think he'll look very happily on that person or that country which basically tries to take away that sense of triumph that he has had for the last 2-3 days.
Also, Trump is not the first US president to get involved in India-Pakistan crisis. Going back all the way to John F. Kennedy, to others, they have also Nixon, Bill Clinton, they have all been involved in some way or the other through their ambassadors. The controversial US ambassadors were posted in Delhi, like Frank Wisner, who was very famous because he used to travel to Kashmir and meet all parties there. So, and India's institutional mechanism has a great deal of memory as far as how to deal with American presidents who are enthusiastic about solving Kashmir issue, or who are enthusiastic in adding Kashmir issue to their list of global troubles that they want to leave as their legacy of having solved those crises, like Irish problem, the Israel-Palestinian problem, and then they also like to add Kashmir to that kitty. But then Indian establishment has known how to deal with US presidents, and they have never confronting the US president who is anyways willing to help. So as of now, Trump, I don't think, as I heard, that Indian establishment will simply not confront Trump, because first of all, his attitude or his comments are not malevolent. These are not comments that where he's trying to harm either of the parties. So when the American president doesn't want to hurt anybody, so why should there be any confrontation? This is a friendly gesture by the US president, and if we don't agree with that gesture, perhaps it will be communicated to his team rather than him, in a very polite manner, and I think that's happening as we speak.
Okay, and also another important part of his claims is the point that he's raising about trade. Now, this of course is coming in the backdrop of Trump's infamous tariffs, and he has recently also claimed that India has agreed to waive off 100% tariffs, and now he says that he kind of used trade as leverage to broker this ceasefire agreement. So how true are these claims? What is the role of trade in this? Do we know anything about this?
Well, Donald Trump is here just a few months, and he's already shaken up the whole world. The trade route is already obvious from what we have seen in the India-UK free trade agreement. Details of that agreement is also not being fully shared with us, but we know that extensive concession has been given to the United Kingdom. If that is the route, then you can imagine how extensive and what a landmark agreement it is going to be with the United States in the coming months. So I think everybody and also Donald Trump himself understands that India, being one of perhaps the largest global South consumer base in the global South, it's something that United States would not like to miss at this juncture in Indian history. So it is something extremely lucrative from the American point of view, and it is something that India has to be extremely cautious about, because you have the trade deal with the United States government, the superpower in the world affairs right now, and for the superpower, trade is essentially a form of warfare. So the United States is very serious about its trade terms and conditions, and war is part of that. In the real world, real war is also part of. It's, as we know, the arms trade, etc., are also part of that. So I think India's caution and India's conflict with Pakistan is part of the larger drama that's happening in trade. So let's not consider trade as just a commercial activity. It's also a part of much larger geopolitical bag of events and dynamics, a lot of blood and sweat, including on the battlefield. That's part of that trade negotiation.
Also, today we saw Trump saying that apparently he spoke to Tim Cook of Apple and he asked him not to go ahead with his expansion plans in India, and he said, I allowed you to do it in China but not in India. So how must one see this statement in the backdrop of, I'll do a lot of trade with India, so you stop this ceasefire, you stop this conflict with Pakistan?
But again, that will, he wants basically a lot of trade with India. He wants Indians to buy American items. So if you're building for example, Apple manufacturing facilities, Americans will have to buy from Indian side. So in that sense, he's not contradicting himself really in this issue. But again, just to go back to your earlier question, I'm not surprised at all that he brought up trade here, because if you look at the last few months since he came in January, all his numbers, all his popularity numbers were basically just plummeting because of the tariff issue domestically. And he was facing a lot of heat, and he's facing a lot of heat not just from others, from the US corporate side, from the Wall Street and all those that. So he had a lot to prove, and this has been his tariff has been an issue that he has been talking a long time, not just when he was president, but earlier when he was not even in politics. And so I'm not surprised that he brought up trade again. Basically, he just wants to prove that his idea about the tariff, that like he said, nobody has used trade the way I have done, he in context of trade. So he wants to basically again, what he thinks is a winning triumph that he has done. He again has to prove, and he has to align the trade issue with that, to basically so that the burnish of the India-Pakistan ceasefire kind of goes off. The polish of that can also reflect. He can get reflected. His trade issue can get the reflected glory from that. And that is by some of one of my readings. But in the end, we haven't seen the transcript, and we won't ever see the transcript of those phone calls. And so we never know actually what happened and whether trade was even discussed there. Even though the Indian side has been very categorical that trade was never discussed in any of those issues.
Yeah, but trade is an ongoing discussion which is being handled by other departments, or the Commerce Department.
Yeah, and it's always when you are having political talks between two sides, even if it's not discussed, you always think of other things that are going on in the relationship, and you always think of how it could impact the other side and other, for example, talks. So it's always there in the back of your mind.
Yeah, and as far as Donald Trump presidency is concerned, we are already seeing that everything is interconnected. So if you pull down something, then the other parts of that game, the larger game, could get disturbed. So therefore, I think the Indian side is cautious.
So if we talk about triumphs, as Devirupa was saying that he wants to show this as one of his triumphs, but I think Pakistan has also claimed victory in some form after the end of after the stopping of hostilities. And but what Pakistan has also been trying to do for a while is to make the Kashmir issue international. So with this, would you say that it has successfully done so? And with Trump once again talking about India-Pakistan, so has Kashmir once again been rehyphenated, and has it been internationalized once again, would you say?
It's difficult to deny that. It's quite obvious that it's now in the headlines. as long as the international media keeps Kashmir on the headlines, the issue is one of the top news in international news items. So yeah, there we are. The reality is staring at us from our TV screens. But having said that, I would also say that wars are not fought in a single sweep. A war is fought on a 24-hour cycle, and I think there are good days for war and bad days for war. Pakistan might have had a good day in those 3 days, and India also might have had 1 or 2 days of good days, and they might have also attained whatever goals they basically set out with, like hitting the terror targets, and then also they made the points by hitting the air bases, which are very critical, and we all understand that all Pakistani air bases are linked to their larger strategic command structure. So extremely sensitive areas were also hit. So those messages were delivered to Pakistan. So at the end, the superpower of the world has interest wherever there are conflicts rolling. So the superpower has a tendency to get involved. Now, in this particular case, we have the United States as the superpower. And look at any conflict in the world today. The United States is invested, the be it Ukraine front, Israel, Palestine. A few years back, it was Afghanistan, and now, of course, India, Pakistan. So, United States is here, and that's a reality. Whether we call it internationalization of Kashmir issue or not, the fact of the matter is that India is the stronger side because India initiated the response to this terror attack. But also, rationally speaking, whether in a conflict situation or not, there has to be a space to discuss terrorism, and that should not be dismissed away. And that, I think, is the larger message that India is trying to convey to the international platforms. It's like United Nations Security Council and others, that whether you appreciate me taking action to eliminate terror threats in Pakistan, the fact is that there was a mass casualty event on 22nd of April in Pahalgam, and that sort of mass casualty terror events are not really unacceptable, especially by a democracy. So that rational space also has to be created and nurtured by our cause.
Devirupa, you want to come in on this? Has the Kashmir issue been rehyphenated again?
I know. Again, like he said, it's very difficult to deny it. That the point where when do you say what is the definition of internalization of a dispute? Is basically when other countries say that they also want to be part of the finding a solution to that subject. And after a long time, this is the first time in decades, perhaps,
I think since 1999, perhaps.
yeah, perhaps that another country, the US, has talking about the dispute. It's not about the cessation of hostilities again. It's about talking about the dispute. So if a country as a superpower of the world is mentioning that, so it is a kind of it is a worrisome issue. But again, the way India kind of deals with it is one is basically by saying that there's no third party mediation and hoping that because of the kind of precedent of the person that Trump is, that he may forget about it in a few days.
Yeah, no, but also, I mean, we should not also compare this particular episode with Kargil, mainly because, as our own narrative has shown that the Pakistanis sent drones from Sir Creek till Leh Ladakh. So it tells us the extent of this conflict and the vast nature of this conflict.
The entire
the
Western
entire Western, international border, and not just the LOC. So it was not contained with the LOC or say the Kargil sector. It was related to the entire defined and undefined border, even including Sir Creek, which is a water body essentially. So look at this had it broken into a full scale military conflict, the whole world would have sort of woken up, and because it's really a bulk of the world's humanity's total population is in South Asia, that would have been in conflict with each other.
So at the end of this, while the Indian government, Modi himself, and the BJP are saying that Operation Sindoor is still ongoing, it's not ended, even though Saturday's agreement was reached, understanding was reached. So, is there a winner in this at this point? What would you say?
Oh no, I don't think we can go down that path of finding out the winner and the vanquished parties, simply because the two primary players here have not really declared that the hostilities have ended. If at all there has to be a party which has managed to draw attention to themselves, that is the Kashmiri disenchanted groups or groups who have shown that they have that power to trigger a regional conflict, which is very worrisome because whether you look at the Kargil conflict or go back in time to 1971, which was essentially rooted in state action, because the Pakistan military was indulging in killings in East Pakistan, and therefore Indira Gandhi's government got into the act. And go back in time in 1965, it was again linked with the military activities. The irregulars, or so to say, if we can use the term terrorists, were active in 1948 in that first war, in India-Pakistan war. But in this particular conflict, we saw that a particular terrorist group or any terrorist group can create a mass casualty event and trigger a conflict, which I think uh, should make us aware of the fact that apart from this talk about who won the crisis, there are many volatile players or very volatile elements who should really send the alarm bells ringing that we don't have anything to control these forces. And that is also the uncertainty of 21st century warfare. We are seeing that in the battlefield in Ukraine, because I keep going to these areas as points of reference for us, because these are also parallel conflicts that are happening there. Look at the way the fighting is happening in between Hamas and Israel. Despite the sheer unequal size of the Israeli forces and the Hamas fighters, they still have the cards on them because they have the hostages in captivity of Hamas. So similarly, I think the militant groups or terrorist groups, whatever we call them, in Kashmir or also across the border, they have a lot of cards with them, and one has to really take that into account.
So that really brings me to the question that has because this whole thing started with Pahalgam, where 26 civilians were killed on
And
April,
dozens injured very horribly.
and dozens injured, and this was about a month back on April 22nd. Since then, India has conducted Operation Sindoor, which is supposed to be still ongoing. 9 targets have been hit in Pakistan and Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Now, India is saying that a decisive message against terror has been delivered. But would you say that this action has actually delivered a message on what India plans to do with terrorists? Because is this the answer, or do we have any path forward that is apart from just going and conducting military strikes? What is the decisive course of action to deal with terrorism in Kashmir, which was supposed to have ended in 2019?
I think it's the same question that same question they were asking, if they're winners or losers to this. You cannot say, we cannot declare anybody winner or loser, because if I'm just going by the narrow definition of what the Indian aim of Operation Sindoor was counter-terrorism, right? And you then targeted 9 sites, including Bahawalpur and Muridke, which are the headquarters of JEM and LET. Now we have to basically see for the next month or years, will there be any other terrorist attacks? We cannot basically at this moment even make an assessment on what will happen in the future. So I don't think anybody who will say that there is a winner to this, I can declare anybody a winner right now. That will be a very dishonest way of basically portraying the whole scenario, because you cannot decide on it. We had already Uri. We had the surgical strikes after that. After that, we had Pulwama. That was supposed to, but again, Uri, the whole surgical strike was supposed to be a decisive one. We had, I still remember the press conference that we had in the MEA when all the other
Surgical strikes,
for the surgical strikes, and was supposed to be a path-breaking offensive, defensive action, whatever you call it.
The beginning of Ghar mein ghus ke marenge.
Yes,
Exactly. Then after that, Pulwama did happen. And then we did Balakot. Again, that was supposed to be decisive. This is again another third counter-terror, that kind of extraterritorial action that we have taken. So we have to basically wait and see what will be the results from this. And again, it depends on what the both sides have taken the lessons from it. I'm not sure if either side have got the same kind of lessons from this. I don't think Pakistan has learned. They're jubilant right now.
If you look at what happened in Kashmir in the last 48 hours, there have been 2 major terror attempts, and both have been quote unquote neutralized. But then, if these attempts were successful, can you imagine what would have been the following action that India would have taken? So I think we really have to deal with these various groups that are active in Kashmir, and obviously we are being reminded that the things never really became normal with the abrogation of Article 370, I mean 2019. There remains much cleaning that needs to be done at the level of political connection, at the level of establishing civil. Because you asked, what can be done to bring everybody on board? Because I think the military action is actually one compartment of the many compartments that have to be opened. And I don't think the military action alone can suffice. And
I would also say that basically ultimately the decision of the terror infrastructure, India's whatever actions is only can only be peaceful. It has to be done by the Pakistan government, and why would Pakistan government or the Pakistani establishment take any actions against these terror groups? And that will only be done by external pressure, and this external pressure can only come from its external actors like the US and other countries. And you have seen, for example, the FATF was a very effective way in that sense to kind of force it to take action against LET and all those foreign terror organization, UN proscribed foreign terror organization. So they were under FATF for a long period, and that really impacted their economy and took it back by decades, I would say, to an extent. So that is kind of the action. It's a long grind. You cannot. I don't think a military action necessarily, takes it back, because it also provides them a certain boost because they all get together. There's a sense of unity, a sense of threat that brings them all together in a sense. I would say it takes a much more concerted diplomatic pressure by all the other countries also, and they also India has to also work with other countries to tell them that basically it is in your interest to put pressure on Pakistan to take down these terror groups, and also in the interest of Pakistan itself for its own for its own economy and its own development. So it's a very I think a much more takes a lot of time, and it's much more less glamorous and much more less.
Just remind that your viewers that after 26/11 attack in Bombay, there were all these stalwart human rights workers who actually flew to Delhi, and they held a press conference. The people like Asma Jahangir and others. Asma Jahangir had tears in her eyes as she was speaking in Ashoka Hotel. But the fact is, we are also passing through a phase of politics in India as well as in the region. The American president is also one such person who has all sorts of experiments on his table. So, we are also going through a phase where that sort of broader civil society dialogue simply cannot be imagined right now. Because if you even start talking about it, it will appear as if we are not aware of the political reality at the moment. But so I think let the military phase be over, or perhaps let it run its course. And once this option is totally exhausted, only then perhaps other windows and other channels open up. Because this requires a very broader regional as well as global conversation, so that Pakistan has to be made to realize, more or less, that these sort of activities that have taken place is simply not okay for the region.
Finally, I want to ask you that as we were just discussing, of course, it's a long drawn process. It requires participation of not just India and Pakistan, but larger global powers, and not just military action, but as you were saying, diplomacy on various levels. But if we look at the messaging, the political messaging in India by the BJP, which is the ruling party, and Prime Minister Modi, after he broke his silence on Monday, since then there's been kind of a blitzkrieg of videos and messaging from the BJP. They are conducting a Tiranga Yatra all over the country, emphasizing on the success of Operation Sindoor. And the BJP's messaging has focused on only the military aspect of this whole thing, not talking about diplomacy and all of that, even though through the course of the last week, we only saw briefings from the MEA in terms of the Indian government, and there was no political message apart from the all-party meeting, which
and also the military did have a press conference.
Military did have a press conference. So this political messaging that is being given out on the back of Operation Sindoor is that it's once again muscular policy, nationalism being fronted as the answer to such terrorism, because this has seemed to be working for them in the past. So do you see this as a conscious effort by the BJP, especially because it did face some questions when the ceasefire was announced? A lot of voices who were whipping up war hysteria were not happy with the fact that there was a cessation of hostilities. Now, is there an effort with this continued celebration of the military actions that no, we did not give in, and we have stuck to our path?
More or less it fits the pattern. What BJP is doing is not new. If you go back in time, in 1999, the response of the ruling party at that time was more or less of the same kind. You remember when the nuclear bombs were tested by Atal Bihari Vajpayee government, Outlook came out with back at that time with the famous cover story where Vajpayee's eyes were on fire. If you go back even more, back in time, you find Rajiv Gandhi doing Operation Brass Tacks, and the whole idea of doing Operation Brass Tacks was to somehow neutralize the Bofors scandals impact. And even at that time, the Congress party, the ruling party at the time, had carried out lots of these rallies, runs, a run for unity. Those sort of exercises were carried out. So these are part of the bureaucratic exercise that ruling parties do from time to time to mobilize people and to sort of convert more people to their agenda. That's on expected lines. The point is, what has India achieved as a nation, as a country, and what is the strategic benefit that we are getting from, as a ruling party, they have to pump up their own government and they're doing their dharma. But perhaps as media people or as part of the society, the civil society, we are also interested in finding out really, what really were the gains, what if we really suffered any losses. So there are these, curiosity and these analyses that we have to do as part of the media. And I think there we have to really focus on, did we really gain the objectives that the government had given for Operation Sindoor, what they met. These are my concerns, and I would rather be interested in them rather than looking at if BJP. Of course, BJP will do what it wants to do because that's part of the ruling party behavior. And in India, ruling parties have always conducted themselves and drawn benefit because Pakistan remains and Pakistan will forever remain a great political mobilizing point for ruling parties in India. Look at the way we behave as far as Galwan crisis was concerned. China, you can't really go to election riding the Chinese dragon. Rather, you would say, "Oh, Pakistan is the bad guy in the room, and therefore we beat up Pakistan and we get extra votes." But fighting with China will not get you that sort of votes. Maybe it can inspire some passion among the people. So I would say yes. I mean that's not unsurprising line at all. Rather than causing some traffic jam for us that evening.
Your final takeaway on this, Devirupa, that the fact that the political messaging is quite different from the actual back channel diplomacy and the multi-pronged approach that actually lies ahead of this Operation Sindoor.
Well, again, as Kallol was saying, that it is again not a surprise that the political parties will do politicking. So, in that sense, it was expected that they would be trying to, because it did seem that after the ceasefire agreement, a lot of people in India were really nonplussed by what had happened. Why did we have a ceasefire suddenly? Especially
we saw Vikram Misri being targeted.
Yeah, especially after a lot of the Indian channels were saying that we had almost attacked Karachi port and all that. So if we had made so many achievements, then there was no need for a ceasefire. Why we could have gone far ahead. I think that was the reason that perhaps they had to. Even the PM had to make that speech to the address to the nation, and where he was talking about what they have achieved and that we can't go into nuclear blackmail, and that Pakistan was appealing or begging for the ceasefire agreement. So it is, I think, a political imperative for the BJP right now to explain it, because there had been a lot of anger. Like you said, otherwise the foreign secretary would not have been trolled. If there had not been an anger among the people, or there had been a misunderstanding of actually the status. If there had been a proper reporting, a sober reporting on what the facts were, I don't think he would have been trolled at all. So therefore, they had to go to that. They have to do the politics there. They have to, go back to their base or tell the people that it's not as bad as you expect things to are there. But again, like he said, we have to do the cost and benefit analysis.
And also, let us not forget that there has to be a full-scale investigation into the terror attack itself. I mean, what happened what are the failures, because it's a mass casualty event, and that should not be forgotten because we had a conflict with Pakistan. Because that we have to go into the details and find out that what are the real failures. So many innocent people being killed. Yeah.
And also, I think one of the things we have to also decide on how did other countries, since we are talk about Indian diplomacy, on how did other countries actually react to the thing. Why didn't we, for example, get the UNSC to mention TRF, or in the in the press statement, the resistance front, which had taken credit for the Pahalgam attack. So there are things that even we have to take stock of, and perhaps we have to learn the lessons. Again, it depends on what kind of lessons are being taken forward from here.
All right, so we'll have to keep our eyes on all these developments, that it's not as simplistic as the achievements of a military operation alone, and there's a long way forward, as both Devirupa and Kallol were saying, that what happens next to Kashmir, how do we deal with the Kashmir situation on ourselves and not just internationally. Thank you so much, Devirupa and Kallol, for joining us today, and thank you to the viewers for watching.